So today we're going to talk about one of my favorite games, which is Imperial Settlers, but more importantly, the first faction expansion for Imperial Settlers, Atlanteans, which, as you might guess, introduces a new faction, the Atlantean faction, to Imperial Settlers. So the Atlanteans are quite a bit different from the four original factions from the base game, in that they have different abilities, different special powers, and they introduce a new type of resource called technology. So first we're going to look at a little bit about what comes in the box and what gameplay elements are added to the game. And then we're going to move into what I think about this first faction expansion for Imperial Settlers. So here are the contents for the Atlanteans expansion. The first thing you'll notice is over here on the left, the required supplies for a new faction being a faction board and a new faction building deck for the Atlanteans. Additionally, the expansion adds some new cards for the common deck and some supplemental cards for each of the other existing factions. These new cards go into basically how those factions can use the technology tokens. We'll look at them in just a sec. So this first new resource introduced into Imperial Settlers is technology. The Atlantean faction is pretty much the only faction that can leverage the ability of technology. The other factions can use it as a resource, but not like the Atlanteans. So let's take a deeper look into the Atlantean faction and how they use technology. So here's a setup for an Atlantean faction about partway through the game. And so the first thing you'll notice is on these Atlantean faction cards, they are not worth victory points at the end of the game. If you recall from the base game, each class or each faction card is worth 2 points to that faction at the end of the game. But these victory points are not on any of the Atlantean buildings. This means the Atlantean player basically must acquire all of their points during the game as opposed to at the end of the game. They'll still score points based on the victory points of their common buildings. But these are only worth 1 victory point each at the end of the game, just like the other factions. So the new resource introduced into the game with this expansion is technology. And the Atlantean faction specifically leverages technology to buff up the rest of their buildings. Now, this is only used by the Atlantean player. Technology can be used by the other factions, but only to activate other cards as a cost, like you would use food or wood. But the Atlantean faction can take one of their technology tokens and place it on one of their buildings to then boost that ability, or boost that building. So on the production side, any building with a technology token on it will produce double the goods. On the features, that feature is then doubled in its effect, and then on action spaces, those actions can be used twice. Technology also comes in the form of advanced technology tokens. These are these two smaller piles down here. Now, these tokens are either going to be advanced point tokens. So when one of these advanced point tokens is placed onto a card that produces victory points, that card then produces an additional victory point for every advanced technology token on it. Additionally, the player can use the defensive technology tokens to then put a permanent defensive marker on that token. These technology tokens act the same way as normal defensive tokens in blocking or increasing the cost to raid that building. It's important to note that the Atlantean player must discard all technology tokens on their faction buildings at the end of a turn, but technology tokens on common cards persist from round to round, which means that they can build up a sizable advantage with their common cards. So this is the primary way the Atlantean faction works, is by increasing the ability of both their common and faction cards, but then also increasing scoring opportunity throughout the game so that by the end they'll have enough points to make up for that gap by not being able to score their faction buildings like normal. So for the other factions, the Atlantean expansion does include some additional cards for those faction decks. However, it's important to note that the other four factions cannot use technology in the same way. They can only use technology as a resource, as a cost to activate a building, as opposed to using it to buff up one of their other buildings. This goes the same for the common cards in the deck as well. They're going to be cards that produce technology or use technology, but it only really is introducing a new resource, more of the same in terms of how these get used in the base game. Atlanteans also includes some open production cards, which are introduced in the Why Can't We Be Friends mini expansion, and it includes some rules for basically constructing decks, so using a subset of the faction cards as opposed to just shuffling everything together, if that's interesting play. Most of the time I'm playing just an open format and shuffling everything together. So as you can see, Atlanteans is what it claims to be. It is a faction pack. It introduces a new faction to the game. And that's in fact my only nitpick of this expansion, is that it doesn't do a ton to change the gameplay for the other factions if you're playing some of the 4 from the base game. Really the only benefit is if you choose to play the Atlantean faction. There are some ways that the other factions can use technology, but it turns out to be kind of weird and not really clear as to how that's supposed to help the other factions. But this particular faction does feel very different in the same sense that the original 4 factions felt different from each other. The Atlantean faction definitely feels different in gameplay, especially with that endgame scoring. It's a lot of fun to be playing the game and getting a bunch of points as you trigger abilities and get that engine rolling. But at the end of the game, it can be kind of lackluster when all of your opponents score 10 to 20 points from their faction buildings and you're scoring none. So if you're a fan of Imperial Settlers, I highly recommend this. It's a no-brainer to suggest and recommend this particular expansion. It adds more of a good thing in the sense of a new faction to play. It increases the playstyle, it increases the depth of how the different factions interact with each other. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Atlanteans, the first faction expansion for Imperial Settlers.